recorders. Some 2.5 million Americans now own them. But is it against the law to use them? A federal appeals court says it is to tape copyrighted television programs. But the question of what to do is a complex and unresolved issue. We'll focus on that story tonight as we talk live with the president of a major entertainment conglomerate which brought the suit, with a spokesman for the home videotape machine industry, and with an expert on copyright law.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Good evening. Suing the Sony Corporation is one thing. After all, it makes many of those home video recorders. And perhaps a case can be made for suing Henry's Camera Corporation. Apparently, it sells Sony video recorders. As for Doyle Dane Bernbach, well, it is Sony's advertising agency here in the United States. But why sue poor old William Griffiths? His crime, probably too strong a word, his only violation of the law is that he owns a Sony Betamax. And indeed, he was sued. And together with Doyle Dane Bernbach, Henry's Camera Corporation, and mighty Sony itself, William Griffiths lost. A federal appellate court in San Francisco ruled recently that the videotaping of a copyrighted television program, even when it is done at home for purely personal uses, violates the rights of those who own the program. Sidney Sheinberg is the president of the Music Corporation of America. MCA owns Universal Studios, one of the plaintiffs in this case. Mr. Sheinberg, has it gone a little too far, do you think?
Has what gone a little too far?
This kind of a suit, where you sue a man for owning one of these and possibly using it in the privacy of his own home.
Well, quite frankly, we're really not concerned with the man. We're concerned with the people who make the machines and the people who make the tapes, and we want to be sure that our property isn't taken without being compensated.
All right, Mr. Wayman, is there something reasonable about that? Mr. Wayman, I should point out, is Senior Vice President of the Electronics Industries Association. Anything unreasonable about trying to protect what you own?
No, but we believe that the copyright owners and the motion picture industry is well compensated as it exists, and we believe the court decision by the appellate court was erroneous, and we hope that it will be reversed, reconsidered, and if not, we think that Congress will step in on behalf of the American public and amend the copyright laws to keep up with our modern technology, such as the VCR represents.
All right. We will talk in greater detail with Mr. Sheinberg and Mr. Wayman later in this broadcast. But first, let's focus on what this controversy is all about. Here's Robin Groth.
It's a simple process. Just turn the power on, set the time, put in a tape cassette, push a couple of buttons, and you are taping a movie off television in the privacy of your own home. There's only one thing wrong here. It's illegal.
It's always been our position that the copying in home or outside the home is the same. Copying is copying, and it's illegal.
Stephen Croft is the attorney representing Universal Studios and Disney Productions. They are bringing the legal action against the Sony Corporation of America and the Betamax.
It's really important, I think, to focus on the fact that we're not talking about one man or two people with Betamaxes here. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of these machines.
Bill Baker, a vice president of Sony, doesn't believe the studios have a case.
Well, obviously, Sony Corporation of America strongly disagrees with the decision of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. A number of legislators, both on the House side and the Senate, have either introduced or are considering introducing legislation that would clarify home use video recording and make it clearly legal.
So what is this controversy really about? UCLA law professor and copyright authority Melvin Nimmer explains.
Well, at the very beginning, when the Constitution was first written, a provision was put in there by the founders saying as follows: to promote the progress of science and the useful arts, that's the language used in the Constitution, Congress is given the power to enact copyright laws and patent laws. And the underlying theory was that the way to encourage creativity in artistic, literary, musical creativity, as well as scientific creativity in the patent area, the way to encourage that creativity is to give a property right to the creators, to give them something to sell. So from 1909 to 78, we were under a single copyright law with a few amendments, such as the Motion Picture Amendment. In 1978, we got an entire new copyright law, which in many ways does take account of new technological developments. But these developments are going at such a speed that it's inevitable that technology gets ahead of even the new law. And here, videotape recording is an example of the way in which the Act has not really kept up with that development.
Chet Migden, National Executive Secretary of the Screen Actors Guild, says you can't get something creative for nothing.
The public feels it wants the right to see everything and have everything. But on the other hand, there is the issue of property rights. And something must be done. There must be a compromise between those two elements. The public's desire to see and the respect for the property rights of others.
RCA is betting a lot on the video disc. Unlike the video cassette, the video disc only plays back pre-recorded material and cannot be used to record. RCA says the video disc is the coming thing, and within 2 years, the public will be able to buy a pre-recorded movie disc for the price of a blank video cassette. For musicians whose work is used on records and tapes, on radio stations and in nightclubs, there is a system by which they get paid.
ASCAP really serves as a clearinghouse for the use and performance of music.
Gloria Messenger is the chief operating officer of ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. It is one of the few organizations that collects license fees from music users and distributes the income to members who are due the royalties.
ASCAP monitors by taping local radio and television stations, by getting program performance information from the television networks, by getting programs from the symphony and concert halls, by taking a survey of music uses on airlines, and by taking a sample of performances of background music services such as Muzak.
ASCAP is an example of an organization that has made the copyright laws work, but as satellites, cable systems, and other communication technologies advance, what does the future hold? A satellite dish in every backyard?
I think it's a distant dream within the next 5 years. Certainly it's dependent to a certain extent on the launch of a new generation of satellites.
Wayne Baruch is president of the entertainment division of Robert Wold Communications, one of the largest satellite companies in the world, and he says the future is here.
The best example we've seen recently was the Sugar Ray Leonard-Tommy Hearns fight, where certain viewers who are attached to subscription television stations in various parts of the country paid a specific fee to get that fight into their homes. Lots of other different kinds of events will be delivered in the near future via pay-per-view. The ultimate scenario will be the capability of looking at an index of some kind and making decisions based on material that is not necessarily timely or live, probably movies, probably certain kinds of entertainment specials, but most probably at the outset, educational and informational materials.
If after all of this you are still planning to buy a videotape recorder, you can. Sony has announced it will continue to manufacture and sell its product regardless of the recent ruling. But at least one retailer, Henry Lichtenstein, is protecting himself.
We have here these signs, and we make signs up here in the recording studio, which says that they are in violation of the law, and I think that this will protect me from any lawsuits personally.
Today, it is the use of videocassette recorders in our homes that is being legally challenged. Tomorrow, the problems may be far more complex. How the rights of the creators, the producers, and you, the viewers, are protected may have to be decided by the Supreme Court of the United States. Robin Groth, ABC News, Hollywood.
The right to protect creative work is guaranteed in the Constitution, and there is a whole body of copyright law in the United States. But is technology moving so quickly now that the lawmakers can't keep up? We'll raise that question in a moment when we talk with an expert on copyright law, and again with MCA President Sid Sheinberg and Jack Wayman, Vice President of the Electronics Industries Association. There are some complicated but important legal issues involved in the dispute over home videotape recording, and with us now in our Los Angeles bureau to help sort them out is Melville Nimmer, a professor of law at UCLA and an expert on copyright law. And joining us once again, Sid Sheinberg, president of the Music Corporation of America, MCA, and Jack Wayman, senior vice president of the Electronic Industries Association. Professor Nimmer, if you'd be good enough to help sort this out for us just a little bit and be gentle with those of us who are neither professors nor lawyers, can you, in simple language, explain what the issue at stake is here?
I think I can, Mr. Koppel. Essentially, there are two basic issues. The first is, does the individual in his home who uses his videotape recorder, by that act, commit an act of copyright infringement? And this recent court decision said, yes, that is an act of copyright infringement.
Is he therefore a criminal in the broadest sense of the word?
He is not a criminal. It's not a crime. It's only a civil liability. But may I go on to the second issue, which affects this first issue? The second issue is the seller of the machine, in this case Sony, what is called a contributing infringer by selling the mechanism whereby the infringement can occur? The court said yes to the second point too, and then there is a third point, namely, what is the remedy? What do you do about it? Ordinarily, when somebody wins in a copyright infringement action, he's entitled to a permanent injunction. But this time the court suggested to the lower court, instead of an injunction prohibiting further acts of this sort, instead of that, a royalty can be prescribed by the court as against the company, against Sony. And if Sony pays such a royalty, then the people in their homes are no longer infringers.
All right.
They automatically are made lawful.
Let me go to Mr. Scheinberg of MCA, and it was one of your companies, Mr. Scheinberg, Universal, that was a plaintiff in this action. Would that be satisfactory to you if, for example, Sony were to pay a royalty?
Well, in a perfect world, we obviously would like to preclude the existence of this particular product because we don't believe there's any real fair way for us to be compensated. The reality, however, is that we don't live in a perfect world, and we may have to accept, and indeed we are prepared to accept, a fair and reasonable royalty that would be shared in by all of those people who toil in the vineyards of making copyrighted property, and would guarantee us some just compensation.
I don't want to get us into too complex an area, but if, for example, the royalties end up in the pool, and one of the contributors to the creative pool, let's say, is the producer who came up with Jaws, and the other one is the producer of some C-grade movie that no one really wants to see, how are you going to determine who gets what out of that pool?
Well, that's a complicated issue. I would say this. There is a procedure that exists right now in another area called the Copyright Royalty Tribunal. Some of the problems that are raised by the pool, they can resolve. Other problems would presumably have to be worked out by negotiation or, failing all else, by some type of tribunal that the law might establish.
All right.
In other words, just because the problem is a difficult one, in our judgment, that isn't a reason why the answer should be we're entitled to nothing.
Let me just ask you, I can see why you went after Sony. Sony, after all, is a giant in this industry, but why go after an individual, and why cloud the issue in what, in a certain sense, has raised or perhaps lowered this thing to a certain level of mockery, where you go after someone in their own home?
The reasons for that are really in the realm of the law, and I frankly can't answer that for you.
I could.
But suffice it to say, we have no interest whatsoever in chopping down anybody's door and taking out anybody's Betamax from anybody's house.
All right, Mr. Nimmer, I think I heard you whispering gently there in the background that you thought you could answer it. Why did they go after it?
Yes. In order to hold Sony liable as what is called a contributory infringer, you cannot be a contributory infringer. You cannot contribute to the infringement unless, in the first instance, there is an infringement, a primary infringement. The primary infringement is the individual in the home. Unless that is first established, you cannot go to the second step and find Sony also liable as a contributory infringer.
All right, Mr. Wayman, let me go to you for a moment. What has been suggested so far sounds reasonable enough. If someone creates a product and they infuse it with their own creativity, aren't they justified in expecting to be paid for it?
Well, they certainly are, but we think that the motion picture industry and others are certainly adequately compensated by this product because this product does several things. If it only built home libraries to put away and to use just for even personal use, let alone commercially, which it does not. But that is not the case. The video cassette recorder does three things. It makes home movies with your own camera, and that we are going to film away from tape, tape away from film very quickly. But it also plays pre-recorded cassettes. Some 35,000 titles are now available, 4,000 movies. Only 90 movies were available 4 years ago. And there is a time-shifting use for it. It means that those that work at night, those that work at day, can enjoy programs when they wish to. And those royalties have been paid because the rating services check those sets, VCRs, as if they were television sets, and they compensate the motion picture companies or anyone that originates programs. So that building libraries just doesn't happen in only about 5% of the case of the use of the VCR.
Well, but it can happen. I mean, you must acknowledge that technically there is the possibility that people can tape whatever they want and keep it for as long as they want.
Yes, but technology is leapfrogged. It's not economically feasible to tape off the air with commercials. Let's say a movie that was on this last week, very popular show. You could tape it. And yet you'd have commercials. You might have a fuzzy picture off your set if you don't have a good antenna. And it's probably been censored. It would be so much easier to go out and rent for $5 that same movie, or to buy a video disc, for instance, and enjoy it in that fashion. And people do not save movies or programs as they do Beethoven's Fifth, the Barbra Streisand record, for instance. They keep forever.
All right, what about that, Mr. Wayman? Mr. Scheinberg?
Well, I think we've heard a lot of nonsense here. As far as we're concerned, if somebody tapes a program, even if he chooses to see it later, he is depriving us of a legitimate opportunity, to have him as part of our audience on another showing of the program for which we're to be compensated. B, he's certainly depriving us of an opportunity to sell him a tape. But the most important thing of all is that I take great umbrage, and quite frankly, I'm offended at anybody telling us that we've been paid enough. Our notion of our society, at least it used to be such, was that if you owned a property, you had the right to control its destiny. And I frankly don't want the Japanese manufacturers telling us that we've already made enough money.
Mr. Scheinberg, perhaps the easiest example for us, though, to understand is if we are at home listening to our radio and I take my Sony audio tape recorder and I record a record, am I now infringing upon anyone's rights?
I don't know. The law has apparently not disposed of that question.
But I mean, under this, well, let me take it to our legal expert, Mr. Nimmer. Is that a parallel case?
It arguably is distinguishable. In 1971, Congress, when they amended the Copyright Act at that time, had a committee report in which they said audio taping was fair use, not infringement. Now, and they clearly did not speak of videotaping at that time. It is ambiguous whether, under the new law, that committee report is applicable with respect to audio tape. It's not a clear question at this point.
All right, gentlemen, I'm afraid ambiguity is where we're going to have to leave this issue for the moment. In a moment, a satirical look at what the home videotape dispute could mean for the future. 1984 was the arbitrary date chosen by novelist George Orwell for a kind of worst of all possible worlds, which he saw coming from the trends of his time. Well, according to Tom Shales, the syndicated television critic of the Washington Post, the dispute over videotaping is a sign that Orwell's 1984 is upon us. Shales made the point in a recent column which he taped for Nightline with illustrations by editorial cartoonist Bill Leamer.
It is 1984, the third year of our persecution, O my brothers, O Beta-naughts and Beta-logs, and fellow members of the Betanese Liberation Front. And still they come, the gray men in the greatcoats, the stormtroopers in their clodhoppers, and the brown shirts, and the gray shirts and the brown coats, and still they seek us out, and pick us off, and cart away our Goldfinger, and our Roots, and our great Muppet caper. 3 years, O my brothers, since the decision banning home video recording of TV shows was handed down by a 3-judge panel, combined IQ 30, of the U.S. Court of Appeals in San Francisco. 3 years since 5 million of us went underground with our Betamaxes, our VHSs, our blank tapes, our patch cords, our satellite dishes, and our Whizmagidgets. 3 years on horizontal hold. They staged another air raid last week, my brothers. They flew low over the subterranean cubicle in the dread bulk eraser plane. Another of those converted AWACS they never did send to Saudi Arabia. Their giant magnets swept our Betacombs, hoping to wipe away our fantasy islands, our Johnny Carsons, our masterpiece theaters, our Mr. Bills, our Richard Simmons shows, our Wizards of Oz's, and our Casablancas. The news is not good, oh my brothers. Comrade Joseph K. returned from the front yesterday and reported that the combined military forces of Walt Disney Productions and Universal Studios moved in with their dwarfs and their mice and their incredible hulks and let fly with the dread bulk erasers on a hidden vault of tape stored behind a Piggly Wiggly. There went 132 episodes of the Mary Tyler Moore Show up in a cloud of electrons. There was another speech on the radio today by Jack J. Valenti, president of the Motion Picture Association of America. He called for us to come out of hiding, carrying our tapes over our heads. He said the war against video liberation was costing the movie companies billions of dollars a year. Valenti. We tried to kidnap the corporate imperialist lackey once before, but he was too short. We couldn't find him. Comrade Gunther K. thinks he saw the top of Valenti's head through the back window of his limousine. We will try again. Next time we will bring a smaller laundry bag. The fight goes on. Only yesterday, Sister Henrietta Kay was charged with illegal time shifting. She had been caught red-handed setting her Betamax timer to record soap operas in the afternoon so she could watch them later that night when she got home. They not only confiscated her Betamax, they appropriated her Trinitron. Poor Henrietta was sentenced to 3 hours of hard labor a night, watching the network primetime schedule exactly as the network scheduled it, with no fast-forwarding through the commercials. And now we wait, oh my brothers, we wait for the terror from Hollywood, our nation's capital, to come again in the night. Even Mike Wallace is on our trail now. Creepy peepee cameras roam the countryside. The Eyewitness News jet-propelled traffic copter scours the landscape. Comrade Hector K. thinks he even saw Magnum P.I. casing the terrain in his Ferrari. Charlie's Angels are hidden under the bed. Benny Hill is in the closet. The 10 Commandments are buried in the backyard. I have cleverly disguised a videotape of Fahrenheit 451 as a book. They only told us we could pursue happiness, oh my brothers. They never did say we could record it and play it back. I'm Tom Shales.
In a moment, a look ahead at tomorrow. That's our report for tonight. This is Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. For a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $2 to Nightline, Box 234, Ansonia Station, New York, New York, 10023. Good morning.